comes. And I know there's 19 other members here who are going to do the same thing. That boogeyman approach isn't going to work anymore after what we've seen here with Bill 117 over the last number of hours. That's not going to work. We're not going to fall for that. And the people in my constituency aren't going to fall for it. So whoever is a candidate in Timberley Prospect next time, you make sure they got their speaking notes in order, because if there's a candidates debate or it's a doorstep confrontation with that particular conversation, it's going to be ended very quickly. I'm going to remind the voters in my constituency, Bill 117 proves that the good old boys, they still believe in running the good old politics of Nova Scotia. The politics of Gerald Reagan, the politics of John Buchanan, the same old politics, it's still here. We're still going to be beholden to the corporations. We're still going to be beholden to the unions, not the NDP.
Order, please. We have arrived at the moment of interruption. We will now have the late debate. Order, please. The subject of this evening's late debate was submitted by the honourable member for Timberley Prospect. Therefore, be it resolved that this government finally address the issue of successor rights and severance at Sydney Steel. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on numerous occasions I've risen in my place in this House to discuss this issue about successor rights and compensation for steelworkers. Since 2003, my colleague from Cape Breton South has stood in his place, and each and every time we've stood here to try to realize what these men are going through. My father, his father, steelworkers, now gone, died with dignity and pride. Spent many years, 109 years in my family and 3 generations at Sydney Steel. My colleague from Cape Breton South has talked about his father and the work at Sydney Steel. But let's get to the issue of today, successor rights for the men that were left there. Today, these men, as we stand in this legislature, have no income. Their unemployment insurance ran out in December. They have no income. They have no income. There's 50 members of Local 1064-2 that are getting a little bit of work, what they call crumbs, I guess is what we call crumbs, is getting out and getting some work with some private companies. Mr. Speaker, over the 25 to 30 years that these men spent in that industry, they were in every dirty hole conceivable to mankind. Under the blast furnace, cleaning up the coke ovens, under the open hearth, in the degasser, the salt water line, and every cutting scrap, cutting steel, removing asbestos from Sydney Steel. These men did this job like no other men could, because that was their livelihood. The mill is gone. There's nothing left. It's shipped away. But yet we still have these men. These men have no income. Again, I'll say no income. They're looking for any way at all. So what I talk about in late debate is successor rights, is that now that the Tarapon announcement is coming very shortly, we as legislatures, provincially and federally, there should be some kind of compassion within this announcement of the Tarapons that make sure that these men that spend 25 to 30 years of their lives on that industry get work within the Tarapons project of Sydney Steel. That's all they're asking for. They're not looking for a handout. They're looking for a hand up. They're looking for work. They're looking for a paycheck of any kind. You know, some will say, and as my colleague from Cape Breton South knows, we keep getting telephone calls from Mr. Scott Black on a weekly basis, looking for a compassionate pension. You know, they moved the people on Frederick Street, the federal government. It wasn't because of the environment. It was because of compassion. You know what I mean? It was because of compassion. You know, so what I'm saying is that, you know, and the former premier and the premier that's here today had said, we have treated these steel workers fairly. We have treated them fairly. Now, the colleague that was just elected now from Cape Breton West would know. He spent, as a government appointed employee there, he spent time with these men. These men, these are good men. All they're looking for is a hand up, not a handout. They just want a paycheck. Their lives are turned around. They have families. They have young people in university. They're looking to get employment. You know, they're looking to get some kind of small top-up of their pension that they have that they'll be able to receive when they're 55, but they're looking for employment. With this announcement up and coming, I think that they have every right in the world. They spent their lives in that industry working in every dirty hole imaginable to mankind, and I think out of compassion that they should be allowed to work on the Tar Ponds project. I think that there should be some kind of work out there for them when they can go to work. If not, we're going to have labor unrest on that site. I can guarantee you, as I stand in my place here today, that there will be a labor unrest at that site in the near future, in the year 2007, of these men. What do you do when people have, you know, I remember an old saying back is that, you know, when your belly is full, your mind doesn't work that good. But when your belly is empty, that's when your mind gets sharp. That's the whole thing. When your belly is empty, your mind gets sharp. They have no income. So right now, are they going to the Community Services Department looking? Yes, they are. Some are going. Some are trying to travel out west. Some are looking to get a head start, but they're looking for a hand up, not a handout. I believe that they have every right to successor rights to work on that steel plant. They came back there to rebuild that steel plant in 1989 and 1990 to put the electric arc furnace in. Each and every one of them came back there to work. So why would they not be entitled to having some kind of work on the Tar Ponds project? They have the training. It's well documented that they've done a good job in cutting up the scrap. It's well documented that they're good employees. You can look at their records, that they're good employees, they're good men. Again, they're looking for some kind of compassion to say that, you know, we have to have some kind of income. You know, we're talking $400 million to be announced very shortly by the federal government, the provincial government. So surely, you know, they have a $10 million set-aside project for the Native people. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. But why can't there be any kind of set-aside project for the steel workers? Why can't they have a percentage of that money set aside for the former steel workers? But most of them are in their 50s. Most of those men are from 47 to 55 to 60 years of age. You know, why can't there be a percentage of that project set aside to bridge these men till they get to their age that they can draw their pension and the money that they have? It only makes sense that they should be able to get some kind of work in the Tar Ponds project, a set-aside project for the former steel workers. Doesn't that sound right? I mean, to have a set-aside project, $10 million for the Native people. Why not a set-aside project and successor rights? And we go back in the history of how this started. There was this Sydney Tar Ponds Incorporated, then that became Sydney Environmental Resources, and then it became the Sydney Tar Ponds Agency. But I mean, you know, the members, the bureaucrats that run that dismantled the board of the Sydney Tar Ponds Incorporated and Cyril. In other words, he dismantled the board. So now they can't argue for successor rights because they're no more longer a board there. They disbanded that board, you know, the bureaucrat that was in charge of that file. Mr. Speaker, how much money did Ernst & Young make on that file? Someday maybe the people in the government or whatever else can tell the people of Nova Scotia how much money Ernst & Young made at Cisco, just to let us know how much money they made. I mean, they're looking for a hand up, not a handout. Successor rights, $400 million coming down the pipeline. You know what the joke is in Sydney now as I drive to Sydney and I drive over town? The joke is that we have more engineering firms on Charlotte Street than we have lawyers. Where do they all come from? Why are all those engineering firms now in Sydney? They're in Sydney to do what's been done for many generations in there, is to open the suitcases, take the money, and cross the causeway. It's the history of that island. And for once in the Tar Ponds site it says, benefit local economy. Tell me what the benefit to the local economy is when you have engineering firms that are in there, not from there, that set up offices in old banks along Charlotte Street, waiting for that money to leave. How many years, hundreds and hundreds of years, they've came there, companies came there and taken our resources and taken everything we've owned and crossed the causeway, and we got nothing. These men have nothing. Is this going to happen again? Why not give these guys successor rights at Sydney Steel like they deserve? What they're entitled to. They're entitled to this as far as I'm concerned. They spent their life in that industry. They're entitled to get a hand up and not a handout. They're entitled to say, listen, put a set-aside project. And I wrote the minister, the former minister that's since the cabinet shuffle, Minister Ron Ambrose, to ask for a meeting in Ottawa to discuss this very matter that I stand in my place for tonight. To say, you know, They put their heart and soul. They're anywhere from 47 to 50 years of age. Sure, some of them didn't work 15 years, some of them didn't work 20 years, some worked 25, but some worked 28 years of their lives. Well, what I'm saying is that they're looking for some kind of work. Is it possible that we as legislators in the province can actually help these people? $400 million on a tar pond project, and we're saying you guys are out the door, go to the local welfare office, and we don't want to hear from you anymore. You know, why not give them a job? Have some dignity and pride so these men can finish their careers in the industry that their grandfather started, their father started, instead of having these big companies coming in and taking our money and leaving Cape Breton. It's been done for generations. Let us say today in this legislature that it's not going to happen anymore, that these guys deserve successor rights at Sydney Steel. They deserve to have a job, to pack their lunch can and go to work in the morning. Mr. Speaker, I think it's only, the former Premier and the Premier today said he's done enough. Well, I feel he hasn't done enough. Show compassion, give them successor rights in the tar pond.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and want to thank the honourable member for bringing forward this resolution this evening. Mr. Speaker, I do recall very vividly a point in my life when I was visiting Cape Breton and billeted in the home of a steelworker who happened to be my namesake. His name was Angus McIsaac. And he had at that time been employed at the steel mill for, I believe, about 25 years. And he was kind enough to take one of his days off and arrange to take me on a tour, myself and the friend that was with me. And it was one of the most fascinating days of my life to be able to go through the steel mill right from one end right to the other. And in those days, they were making rails. They were also doing wire, and the production of wire. Nails were being made, and it was quite a day to be able to go through that. And that occurred, I'm guessing now because I don't know the exact date, but I would suggest probably around 1957, 1958 in that time frame. However, Mr. Speaker, since those days, times have changed and the industry changed, and this province found itself in the situation where the company that was running that mill decided to leave. And I recall having been with my father at the time when there was a very large march of concern took place in Sydney, and the government, 1967, about 10 years after the time when I first visited the mill. And after that, the Premier of the day, G.I. Smith, took action to create the agency, the Sydney Steel Corporation, and the province began operating that steel mill. Unfortunately, the operation was not what one could describe as successful, and Nova Scotians are all too familiar with the large amount of money that was put into that mill, and it never did wind up being a successful financial operation. However, the time did come when the province was forced to abandon its best efforts with respect to Sydney Steel and sought to find a buyer for that plant after this government came to office in 1999. And the determination was made that Nova Scotians were going to get out of the steel business, and we had hoped we could find a buyer to operate the plant, but that did not materialize. But all through that piece, Mr. Speaker, fairness for workers was an overriding concern on the part of this government. And I want to, this evening, briefly summarize some of the things that we as a government did with respect to the workers at the mill. Within 6 months of announcing the closure of the plant, all workers received either a pension or a severance from the operations at Cisco. And the decommissioning of Cisco is now complete. And the focus of activity on this site is shifting to environmental remediation and business development within the commercial park. And if you visit that site today, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, you will see an area that has been totally and completely transformed, and there is a huge acreage which is now available for development, and there is a considerable amount of development taking place, while at the same time the remediation is ongoing at that site. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have fulfilled our commitment to employ former steel workers on site whenever possible. And I might say I believe we've done so rather successfully. We kept, on average, 70 people working for 5 years after the closure of that mill. And they provided tremendous service to this whole project and the remediation that was taking place there. And the commitment, Mr. Speaker, to treat former steel workers fairly cost $52 million. And of this amount, about $5 million was paid in severance to workers who were not eligible for a pension. Now, severed workers were provided training opportunities as well as transition services to assist with financial planning, among other things, as a result of our efforts on their behalf. Now, it's important, Mr. Speaker, for everyone to understand that in the implementation of the agreement, the union insisted and the province agreed that there would be no double dipping. And of course, what that means is that former steel workers who accessed a pension under the agreement were forced to retire, and steel plant decommissioning jobs were given to severed steel workers who did not benefit from any pension provisions. In addition, a top-up was provided to the hourly rate paid to former steel workers employed on the steel mill decommissioning to permit them to purchase RRSPs. And this was put into effect as a consequence of the pension plans having been closed and moved to the Department of Finance.
Order, please. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova on a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know for a fact that there was men on Sydney Steel that were pensioned off, severed off, given a severance package, pensioned off, and then went back to work on Sydney Steel. That's triple dipping, double dipping. Thank you.
It's not a point of order, but it's 3 points made. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Well, the honourable member may have information to which I do not have access, and obviously if what he has suggested has in fact occurred, then that was not part of the agreement that was put into effect. As I said, Mr. Speaker, that agreement was put into effect, and the top-up of their income so that they could purchase RRSPs was provided as well. Now, under the pension severance arrangement, there were more than 500,000, that's 500,000 man-hours of work, have been made available to severed workers, which resulted in approximately 70 people being employed over the past 5 years. With respect to the tar ponds cleanup, a commitment has been made by the Sydney Tar Ponds Agency and its funding partners to do everything possible, including former steelworkers, to maximize employment opportunities for local residents and to maximize local economic benefits in general. The agency has implemented a very aggressive plan to ensure that these two objectives are achieved. On successor rights, Mr. Speaker, the union filed an application with the Nova Scotia Labour Relations Board asking that it be granted successor rights in work carried out in the tar ponds and coke ovens cleanup. Now that, Mr. Speaker, the courts in dealing with that dismissed the union's application on the grounds that the board lacked jurisdiction to hear the case. So there is a process to be followed in these matters, and the union followed that process, Mr. Speaker. The Labour Relations Board upheld the Sydney Tar Ponds Agency's position that there had been no prior employment relationship between the union and the agency. So to sum it up, Mr. Speaker, Cisco has provided workers with a pension severance package. It has provided a salary to workers on the cleanup for the past 5 years, and it has helped to broker additional jobs for steel workers. And it has provided transition and training for those who have chosen to move on to other opportunities. And we believe, Mr. Speaker, workers are well positioned for new opportunities that will take place at that site, and believe that they have the ability to make new opportunities for themselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you to the honourable member. Chair now recognizes the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, once again, I find myself rising in my place here to speak about Sydney Steel, and more specifically the workers at Sydney Steel that I feel have fallen through the cracks since the steel plant closed. And like my good friend from Cape Breton Nova, we get calls all the time regarding opportunities or the lack of opportunities for some members who worked many, many years at Sydney Steel and find themselves now very unsure about their future and really with no security. And I along with my colleague from Cape Breton Nova, talk to people like Scott Black all the time. He mentioned Scott. And also Donnie McKinnon, who's worked virtually all his life at Sydney Steel. And there are others who are hurting and don't know what the future holds for them. And, you know, I could stand in my place here and talk for hours about the plight of Sydney Steel over the years and what has happened there. But I can tell you this, Mr. Speaker, that in 1999, the current government won the election on the backs of the Sydney Steel workers by sending out postcards to close Sydney Steel, open hospital beds. Well, half of that was true. Sydney Steel closed, but the hospital beds didn't get open, but the government won the election. And also, you know, steelworkers remember the name of Gordon Balser very well, because it was that same Gordon Balser who stood in the Steelworkers Hall in Sydney and said, "Don't worry, we'll look after you," when he was trying to get out of Dodge, you know, almost running down the road saying, "We'll look after you." And that's the last they ever saw of him. And there is justice, because the taxpayers of this province and his electors felt the same thing about him in the next election. So him and the Honourable Jane Purvis were both gone, two people who weren't very friendly to Sydney Steelworkers at the day. So, I mean, there was some justice there meted out on them two. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, and I know that in a previous role in the Cabinet, I was Minister responsible for Sydney Steel in the late 90s, and we felt that a modern mini rail mill could succeed at Sydney Steel, and we're in the process of doing that when the government changed. And I can recall telling my Premier of the day that, Mr. Premier, I think we're on to something here that could provide work for about 400 people making high-speed rails. And we felt, even after the government changed, that was still a possibility, because, you know, we're buying rails offshore these days. There's nobody producing rails in Canada now, so we're buying that offshore while steelworkers are sitting idle. You know, and some of them steelworkers who fell through the cracks feel very strongly that plant should have remained open. But not only, Mr. Speaker, did the government close the plant,
Order, please.
but the government...
Order. The chamber was respectful of the last two speakers on this late debate, and I'd ask you to do the same for the member for Cape Breton South. The member for Cape Breton South has the floor.
Not only, Mr. Speaker, did the government close the steel plant, but the government ensured that a steel plant would never open again in Sydney to produce rails, because they sold off all the equipment at fire sale prices, so it's gone. So if there was any opportunity to have a rail mill producing rails, and particularly high-speed rails that Sydney Steel was good at producing, that opportunity is gone, because the equipment, the very modern equipment, was fire saled for little or nothing by the liquidators at Sydney Steel, the people that my friend from Cape Breton Nova mentioned, Ernst & Young, who have made a considerable amount of money off the closure of Sydney Steel. Matter of fact, they've had a president of Sydney Steel. I don't know whether Nova Scotians know that, but we still have a president of Sydney Steel. And Ernst & Young are still down there making all kinds of money. The only people that aren't making any money are the steelworkers that have fallen through the cracks. And Mr. Speaker, all these steelworkers are looking for, some of them are not getting adequate pensions. Some of them are looking for work, as my colleague mentioned, on the tar ponds project. They should be guaranteed work there in the future. There's a lot of money going to be spent there. And I think it would be only fair if they received an opportunity to work on that particular project, as well as other Cape Bretoners. There are lots of contractors working there that should be encouraged to hire steelworkers as well, Mr. Speaker. And hopefully they will turn their attention to the plight of people like Donnie McKinnon or Scott Black and numerous others who are down there waiting for some kind of justice to come their way in regards to employment in the future. My colleague also mentioned the fact that we both come from steelworker families, very proud steelworker families over the years. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, and I've said it many times in my place here, that the steelworkers didn't close Sydney Steel. Government decisions and management over the years, bad management, closed Sydney Steel. And it was only at the end of it that we realized, and the people of Canadian National, for example, realized that this particular company can make good rails if given an opportunity to do so. The problem was that opportunity never came. The technology was put in place, but it became a political issue. You know, the media of the day really did a job on Sydney Steel. 11 years after the blast furnace was gone and the orange plume disappeared from the skies over Sydney, every single article that went on CBC featured that plume and saying this dinosaur should be put out of its misery, when 10 years before that, there was a brand new electric arc furnace put in there and the air was clean over Sydney. But the press did a job on Sydney Steel at the time as well. And everybody seemed to think that that was everybody's favorite whipping boy, and they would be on the side of the angels if they did away with Sydney Steel. Well, we lost a golden opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to have a high-speed rail operation operating out of Sydney with 300 to 400 people with a guaranteed market. And now Canadians are buying their rails, CN and CP, and other rail companies throughout North America aren't buying them in Canada anymore, they're buying them offshore. And I think that's kind of a tragedy, Mr. Speaker, that we could not have this type of solid industry continuing in Sydney paying good wages. Unfortunately, we'll never see that day again because the equipment is gone, a lot of the expertise that were working there, they're gone off to other jobs, except the ones that have fallen through the cracks, which I talked about before. So, you know, people have made money off of Sydney Steel. The government is still making money off of Sydney Steel as we speak by liquidating some of the assets down there, but they're spending a great deal of money paying consultants and contractors. And I hope that as a result of all that spending, that someday the steelworkers that are out there wanting their justice will receive at least a look from the contractors and perhaps a word from the government to those contractors that we have people that are hurting. As my colleague from Cape Breton Nova mentioned, those steelworkers are out of EI in some cases and have gone to community services. And I think that that's a tragedy in itself, people who have worked on the Sydney Steel plant for many, many years. So, Mr. Speaker, I again stand in my place here and say there aren't that many of them left down there, that somebody in government, the Minister of Public Works, and the minister responsible for Sydney Steel, or the Premier, or the members from Cape Breton should encourage their government to seek these people out and find out what they can do for them, because they have did their part over the years, contributed to the economy of Cape Breton, and now it's time, I think, for the government to step up and offer these few people that are left adequate jobs, or in some cases, Mr. Speaker, adequate pensions, because they were promised by Gordon Balser, and I can recall the same Gordon Balser standing in his place over there and telling me time and time again that no steelworker would be forgotten. You know, but he made that famous statement on the steps of the Steelworkers Hall, and I happened to be close by at the time, and I think that he made that statement to ensure that he would get out of Sydney in a hurry, making this statement knowing that he probably would never be back there. Well, he wasn't. He never came back after that. But steelworkers have a tape of that statement, Mr. Speaker. They have a tape, and they have a video of Mr. Balser making that statement on behalf of the government. And I think as a former Minister of the Crown, I believe the government has a responsibility to adhere to that statement that that particular minister made, and in doing so would certainly go a long way to relieve the plight of people like Scott Black and Donnie McKinnon and a number of others, Mr. Speaker, who have gone out west to work to try to get enough for EI to support their families in the coming year. So, Mr. Speaker, all I'm asking again, as my colleague from Cape Breton Nova has asked, all we're saying is asking the government to do what they can for the remaining steelworkers who have fallen through the cracks. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The time allotted for this evening's late debate has expired. Sergeant General will now resume into the Committee of the Whole House on bills.
Thank you. Order, please. The committee is now called to order. The honourable member from Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to return to my train of thought because I think for a few moments there I actually had the attention of some members opposite. I know I had the attention of the members of the third party. In fact, I have members of the third party who might respond because of some of the comments that I made, and I welcome them to take part in this debate. You know, if we're going to have a debate, we have to have an exchange of ideas. You know, we don't have a corner on all the good ideas, but we have a suggestion, and we've brought it forward twice with reasonable amendments. They haven't been accepted. So if they haven't been accepted and they voted against these amendments, I hope that the members of the Conservative caucus, members of the Liberal Party, I hope that they would also have the opportunity to speak at this time. Mr. Chairman?
Is the honourable member speaking on Clause 4?
I am, sir.
Thank you,
I
sir.
am, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I apologize for that. I should have made that comment before I began. So I think it's important to be able to say to the members of the two other political parties in this chamber tonight is their opportunity to speak on this important clause and explain to Nova Scotians why they didn't accept these reasonable, sensible amendments to an important piece of legislation. You know, Mr. Chair, I want you to know that I'm proud of the members of the caucus of which I'm a member. I'm proud of them here this evening and this afternoon. I'll be proud of them over the next few hours and probably the next few days, maybe the next number of weeks as we look at this piece of legislation. And if you look at these benches over here, Mr. Chair, I hope you realize there are some members who use the expression they were earning their spurs. They were earning their spurs because when they had the opportunity in this House to stand in their place and speak at length on a particular clause or speak on title, there are members in this caucus who've done that. And I know there's members on the opposite side who look at the fact, could they speak for 59 minutes on this particular clause? Could they speak for 59 minutes without a prepared text? Could they stand in their place, talk about their constituency, talk about what their constituents think about a piece of legislation? So there's some members of this caucus I'm proud of, again, as they've gone through this particular exercise. In particular, I want to turn my attention to the member from Cape Breton Nova. The member from Cape Breton Nova stands in his place and speaks passionately about his constituency and about his constituents. There was just the late debate topic that he was discussing now, or other topics. We hear from the member from Cape Breton Nova on a regular basis, because I want you to know that regular basis includes caucus meetings, and when that member asks to be on the agenda, the members of this caucus listen. And here he was in here again today, speaking on what he felt was the strengths and importance of Bill 117. He pointed out very clearly on behalf of his constituents that this could be an important day for politics in Nova Scotia. This could be an important day because a particular important change could be made today if these amendments had been accepted. He spoke knowledgeably about various details in this particular bill. And there are other members who took their time as they went through this, whether it's clause by clause or whether it is as they were talking on title. The member from Dartmouth, Portland Valley, had her opportunity today to make sure that she spoke on behalf of her constituents. And she spoke at length, she spoke with knowledge, she spoke with compassion. She knows that when the opportunity comes during the next election when she goes door to door, she can say to her constituents, as the member from Cape Breton Nova can say to his constituents, I spoke out about this particular piece of legislation when it came to campaign financing, and these are some of the things that I said. These are some of the thoughts that I brought forward as we, the official opposition in this province, we participated in this important debate. So the member from Dartmouth, Portland Valley, the member from Halifax Needham, a valued contributor to the debates in this caucus, a valued contributor to the debates in this legislature. The member for Halifax Needham stands in her place, calmly and quietly outlines her particular points of view. She has made sure that she gets attention. In fact, I know that there's previous members in this House, when they look back on some of the more, what shall we say, dulcet tones when it came to making points in here. Charlie MacDonald used to remember, I don't know if you remember the MLA from Inverness, Mr. Chair, but Charlie MacDonald used to say, and now of course I can refer to him because Charlie MacDonald is no longer a member of this legislature. I know that when it came to hearing from the member from Halifax Needham, even Charlie MacDonald had to make sure that he was listening intently, because that member was making a lot of good common sense points. Mr. MacDonald, I know, having seen him on a few occasions since then in the street, would say in a regular fashion, say hello to Maureen for me, if I may at that time quote that. I'm talking about the member from Halifax Needham. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair, let me know. I want you to know this is important. This is an important day in Nova Scotia politics. This is an important day because the members of my caucus, our caucus, have had the opportunity to speak. But more importantly, I'm most proud of the leader of the official opposition. The leader of the official opposition, back in November made it very clear, if we are going to change campaign financing in this province, if Bill 117 is going to be done correctly, let's do it right from the get-go. Let's make sure that we no longer have donations from corporations and that we no longer have donations from unions. Now that is a moment of infamy, because I can tell you, each and every one of us, each MLA in this place, the 20 NDP MLAs will make sure that when the time comes when we go door knocking, whether it's in the election or whether it's in the good weather ahead of us in the spring, we can be able to say we spoke on that piece of legislation. We said there should be a bright, new, clear day when it comes to campaign financing. Whether it's the member from Cape Breton Nova, whether it's the member from Dartmouth, Portland Valley, whether it's the member for Halifax Needham, the members of this caucus should be proud of the fact, and during the rest of the debate as we discuss other particular amendments, we can say we led the way on this particular debate. We wanted it to be a new and different way of having campaign financing in this province, and that the other parties were not willing to listen. They were not willing to understand the fact that when it comes to good ideas, they don't have all of them, and this is not a piece of legislation that will help campaign financing in this province. The member, the leader of the official opposition, the member from Dartmouth Cole Harbour, should be proud of the fact that he has stood in his place, he has defended his point of view, and he has said on behalf of this caucus, after lengthy discussions, a decision that was made by this group of NDPs, we can live without union donations. In fact, we'll be a stronger, better connected, more grassroots party, because we will depend on individual donations. We no longer have to depend upon union donations. That was a bold statement that I want you to know each and every MLA in this particular caucus is proud to associate themselves with, and we will make sure when the time comes during campaigns over the next months or the next years, that will be made abundantly clear to the voters who will have that option. So I bring this up again, and I pointed out to the members opposite and the members of the third party, when you put that legislation out there, when you say to those particular members, you make sure you tell them the NDP's always in bed with the union, you go right ahead and you give them that boogeyman argument again, because we're going to blast it out of the water. We're going to tell you we didn't want that to continue. We did not want that to continue. So that one, Mr. Chairman, that one is dead. Embarrassing politics again is happening today as members opposite say, no, we're going to go together. we're going to make sure that we continue to do the old-style politics of Nova Scotia. And the member from Pictou East said it best. It was a good day to get rid of the shackles of influence. The shackles of influence. And I shared with the member later on during his time when I had the opportunity to visit a number of students in political science classes at Halifax West and at Sir John A. Macdonald High School, two high schools that share the privilege of having students from the riding of Timberley Prospect. There is a cynicism there among young people, a cynicism that really is very disturbing, because they believe, young people believe, that if you have deep pockets, you have more influence with politicians in this province than if you're just an average citizen. And why shouldn't they believe that? If they see what's going to happen here this evening and over the next few days as this continued coalition continues, they will see it's the same old, same old. The shackles of influence, we will go with the one who pays us the most. And that's where we have stood before and said, look at who donates to the Democratic Party. And look at what we're prepared to sacrifice. Look at the change we're willing to make. But here's the key thing, and I pointed out to the members of both parties opposite and the party to my left, and they are not really to my left. I think they're further right than the party across from it. This is not a new idea. This is not a new idea. They have done it in Quebec. The Parti Québécois in the 90s brought forth a piece of legislation that included banning corporate, banning union donations. They have done it in Manitoba, and I know members opposite and the members of the third party, particularly that previous member from Cape Breton Nova, who would say, the socialists of Manitoba. Well, let me tell you, it's not just the Red River that's red in Manitoba. There's some good ideas out there when it comes to campaign financing. But more importantly, this piece of legislation, the banning of corporate and union donations, has taken place in Ottawa. The federal government, those parties who are constantly at each other in one way or another, as we see it on the floor of the House of Commons, or we see it during question period, those parties in Ottawa managed to agree to bring forward campaign financing that included this particular, we will go with individual donations. So it's not reinventing the wheel, it's new legislation to Nova Scotia, but it's not new legislation to the people of Quebec, it's not new legislation to the people of Manitoba, and in Ottawa, they have accomplished something. The parties in Ottawa agreed to this piece of legislation. So why couldn't we do it in Nova Scotia? Why couldn't we do it in Nova Scotia? If we could get all four federal political parties, as different as they have on other issues, if they can reach compromise on this particular piece of legislation, why can't we do the same thing? Why can't we do the same thing? They have founded an example for us to follow, an example for us to be able to look at, and we're always saying, well, whether we're using it as an excuse or not, Ottawa is standing in our way. We can't possibly go too far down the road on this because Ottawa hasn't got the legislation in place. I remember the particular example that I've heard from a number of occasions, the offshore injuries and the difficulties that have happened there. Well, we can't deal with that problem because Ottawa hasn't done their work when it comes to the legislation. Well, they've done their work this time. And for us to look and have a degree of consistency, it would be a great way to have this piece of legislation. We could be on the same page. We could be in step with Ottawa. We could be in step with the federal government on this particular piece of legislation. A common sense piece of legislation that has some wonderful amendments forthcoming, amendments that I know the members of the third party will be very interested in later this evening and, of course, tomorrow. I want to bring to your attention the comments of a senior who lives in my constituency. Her name is Frances Eisner. Frances Eisner never misses the legislature when it's on television. She never misses it. In fact, she wanted to make sure that the member from Pictou East knew that she had heard his comments earlier today, particularly when he made reference to the shackles of influence. Frances Eisner follows politics in Nova Scotia. And so this afternoon, I received a call from my constituent assistant that Frances had called the office from Lakeside and she wanted to talk to me for a few moments. And she said, proud lady that she is, she said to me, "Fight the good fight, Mr. Estabrooks. Fight the good fight on this particular piece of legislation. And thank Mr. Dexter," her quote, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, "thank Mr. Dexter for bringing this forward. This is not necessarily a sign location for the NDP on Lakeside Drive in my constituency. This is a senior who has understood that the leader of the official opposition made a decision with the caucus input that no longer were we going to be tied to that particular influence, the shackles of influence of saying we always have to be in bed with the union." So I want to thank Frances for giving me that call and telling me that she was paying attention. And maybe when she realized, of course, the legislature was on, she really didn't know some of the details of Bill 117. But more and more Nova Scotians are realizing, you know, they're keeping these long hours, they're debating a particular piece of legislation. There's another item out there, a question period, that tends to grab the headlines. But when it comes to this particular debate, there are people who are paying attention. There are people who are saying, you know, that amendment that the NDP brought forward, that the leader of the NDP brought forward, about no longer having to have union donations, that's a particular amendment that really is a bold move in Nova Scotia. And it is. I heard a comment earlier today, it's a football analogy. Darrell Royal, who is the coach of the Texas Longhorns, used to say that his running game always got him to the bowl games. And Darrell Royal used to say, you dance with the girl who brung ya. Bad, I know, but I'll have to use it as an old teacher, right? In other words, you stick with what you got, because if you stick with what you got and it works, it'll get you back there time and time and time again. Well, I think this one is not going to work for those members of the government and those members of the third party. You continue to stick to the old ways of politics. You continue to stick to how we've done it for years, that we're dependent upon the big businesses or dependent upon the unions. You continue to do it the old way, and eventually it's going to come back and it's going to bite you. And it might bite you in a place of your body that we might not be able to admit in here with parliamentary language. But I'll tell you, we will face the day on the doorstep when we look at the fact, with this amendment and other amendments that will be forthcoming, we will be able to say, we fought the good fight, as Frances Eisner encouraged us to do. We made sure that we went ahead and we had a particular reference to this clause, when we had a particular reference to this bill, where we said we were going to fight the good fight to make sure that Nova Scotians knew the NDP and the leader of the NDP was willing to make that bold step. Perhaps when you look at what's already done in Quebec, perhaps what you look is already done in Manitoba, and of course in Ottawa, maybe it's not that bold a step. Maybe it's just a common sense step. Now, we all know that people are cynical of politicians. Well, I hope you know that anyway. You know, people are not necessarily ranking us up there as, you know, a role model for people in parts of this country or parts of this province. Nova Scotians have not been impressed by politicians in this province for a long time. Justifiably so. You know, I can tell you as a history teacher, when I began to talk about how things were done in this province, and we began to look at the names of certain previous premiers, when we began to look at Senator John Buchanan, and we began to look at some of the embarrassments of John Buchanan, and I can bring them to your attention, but I think it would be unfair at this time. And Mr. Chair, I want you to know, John Buchanan, the Lions Club member for Spryfield, good community citizen, but as the premier of this province, the rest of this country was laughing at us and how we were doing business, or laughing at him as how he was doing business of that day. And I can mention anything from toilet seats to, well, you name the example. And I want to come back to the history end of it. I want to come back to the history end of it because if we're going to change history, we have to be open-minded to this particular type of change. When we look at what we're doing here tonight, and we're looking at this debate, and I'm looking at the particular comments that I want to be made here this evening, I want Nova Scotians to know that tonight was a night we could have made a difference. We could have made a change. We could have had funding changed forever in this province. it could be changed fundamentally forever if we looked at the fact that we were going to have campaign financing in this province based upon individual donations. An individual donation, which would mean that we no longer be beholden to a powerful, influential group. We no longer be beholden to a union. And I don't consider myself in my constituency beholden to anyone. And I heard the member from Cape Breton Nova stand in his place and say those things. He got elected here in his own merit. He got elected here in his own merit. And he, after all, is one of the people that we should be proud of the fact. And if the members or the interim or acting or whatever he is, member of the third, leader of the third party wants to stand in his place and have his say, stand in your place and have your say on this particular piece of legislation, this particular clause. When it comes to other topics that we'll bring forth over the next few hours, I hope that they do stand forward and have their say. Because at this stage, as members in my constituency have said, this doesn't sound like much of a debate. This is the NDP speaking at length, bringing forward some good common sense amendments and ideas, and no one else is participating. The deal's in. The deal's done. In fact, I heard, might be inappropriate, I know you'll run me out of the house if it is, the fix is in. Now, here we had the member from Cape Breton Nova earlier say that in this house a deal had been made. Now, we're looking at this particular piece of legislation. Good idea. Good common sense solution. However, it would seem to me that if it's going to be dismissed, that we are looking at other forms of amendments and other ideas that we're going to bring forward during this debate. Because when the time comes, and Mr. Chair, when you're out there on the campaign trail again, when the time comes, I know that anyone who does not participate in this debate, the question could be asked of you as a potential candidate, as a potential politician or a potential MLA, what did you say during the debate on Bill 117? They might not know the bill. What did you say about that donations? Should we continue to use corporate donations? Should we continue to accept union donations? Did you have anything to say on that particular piece of legislation? And thus far during this debate, Mr. Chair, I would say that the members of the NDP caucus can say, and will say, I know proudly, they had their particular say. They made sure that they spoke their opinion on this particular clause and this particular piece of legislation. That will be an important thing when the election comes, because whether it's campaign financing or not, and when you have a debate on ideas, it takes two. It takes two sides. In this case, maybe three sides. It takes a number of sides to have a particular difference and a point of view when it comes to a discussion of this sort. Now, Mr. Chair, I want to go back to one key issue, and then I'm going to wrap up my thoughts. And I know that members opposite will be pleased with that, and the members of the third party are just dying to get in their feet about this. And it comes back to old-style cynicism politics. It's there. I know that in my old-timers hockey dressing room, I took less heat as a school principal than I do as a politician. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, people look at you and they say, why would you ever get involved in politics? Well, I can tell you, Mr. Chair, I got involved in politics because of the fact that in my particular constituency, we just couldn't put up with the representation that we had from the old political parties for a number of years. It just wasn't going to have to continue with the growth and the need and the important changes that are taking place in that growing constituency. That's why many of us got involved, because we just couldn't stand the quality of representatives that were there ahead of us, that were there and served years before. We had heard people speak about it. We had heard people say that's an embarrassment to have that particular person as a member of the Nova Scotia legislature. I know that the member from Waverley Fall River Beaverbank is a perfect example of that. That's what motivated him to run initially. That's what motivated him to run again. And that's the reason he's here today, because he's a member who stands in this place, whether it's on this piece of legislation or other pieces of legislation. He participates in debates. He has his say. And when the time comes for re-election, he'll go out there and he'll work hard to make sure he can say, I spoke when campaign financing was discussed. I supported the leader of the official opposition saying, we no longer need union donations. We no longer need them because we'll be stronger, we'll be more connected, we'll be more involved, we'll have more support from people locally because of the fact that we are looking at what is making a difference in Nova Scotia politics. So, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to the comments of other members. I can assure you, I look forward to the next election. I look forward to a healthy exchange of ideas, whether it's in this House or in the doorsteps of Timberley Prospect. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further speakers on clause number 4? The motion before the committee shall clause 4 as amended at law amendments carry. Recorded vote has been called. Ring the bells. For an hour. So the committee will reconvene at 7:54. Order, please. Please close the doors. Committee on the Whole House is called to order. Yes. The motion before the committee is shall clause 4 as amended at law amendments carry. A recorded vote has been called.
Mr. Hurlbert.
Yes.
Mr. Morse.
Yes.
Mr. Barnett.
Yes.
Mr. McIsaac.
Yes.
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Baker.
Yes.
Mr. Muir.
Yes.
Mr. D'Entremont.
We.
Ms. Bolivar Getson. Absent. Mr. Taylor.
Yes.
Mr. Fage. Absent. Mr. Chisholm.
Yes.
Mr. Dukes. Yes. Mr. Scott.
Yes.
Ms. Stretch.
Yes.
Mr. Parent.
Yes.
Mr. Gocher.
Yes.
Ms. Casey.
Yes.
Mr. McLeod.
Yes.
Mr. Bain. Mr. Dunn.
Yes.
Mr. Porter.
Yes.
Mr. Parker.
No.
Ms. Massey.
No.
Mr. Steele.
No.
Mr. McDonnell.
No.
Mr. Corbett. Absent. Ms. Maureen McDonald. Mr. Dexter. Absent.
I think he said yes. I think he said yes.
Mr. DeVoe.
No.
Mr. Manning McDonald.
Yes.
Mr. Sampson.
We.
Mr. Caldwell.
Yes.
Ms. Whalen.
Yes.
Mr. H. Dave Wilson.
Yes.
Leo Glavine.
Yes.
Ms. Moore.
No.
Come on, Dave, do the right thing.
Mr. David A. Wilson.
No.
Ms. Conrad.
No.
Mr. Paris.
No.
Ms. Raymond.
No.
Mr. Zink.
No.
Mr. Prera.
Gordy, do the right thing.
Absent.
Come on, Gordy.
Mr. Goss.
No.
Mr. Epstein.
Nay.
Is that a no? Mr. McKinnon.
No.
Mr. Belleville.
No.
Mr. Estabrooks.
Nay.
Mr. McNeil.
Yes.
Mr. Terrio. Absent.
And 16? Yes. Those in support of the motion, 27. Those opposed, 16.
Motion is carried. We will now return to Clause 2 as amended at law amendments. Shall the clause carry? Carry. Clause number 5. Shall the clause number, the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before we go on to the Clause 5 that's in the bill, our party wanted to introduce a, it says Clause 4 here, but I guess it would be a new, it's a new clause, which would say within 30 days of the end of each calendar month, every candidate for the leadership of a recognized party shall file with the designated person a disclosure statement showing the full name and residential or business address, other than a post office box, unless that is the only address available, of each contributor whose contributions received by that candidate during the previous calendar month, exceed $10 in total, and the amount of the total contributions by that contributor. So I have asked that these be distributed. So I'm looking at this as a new clause, and and there's some ancillary. Just start distributing. He has one actually. This one is one that would say the rules that we have with regard to disclosing donations into the Act as we have it, and with the bill as we have it before us, does not specifically say that leadership candidates for political parties must disclose their donations. So, from our perspective, we think that that is something that should be done, Mr. Chair. We think it's a good idea, and it's one that we would like to move as a motion, as an amendment, a new clause to the bill that then would allow that. So.
As I understand, honorable member, the amendment that's been tabled